I'm just going to give a brief overview, and then, as I said, we have presentations from Georgianne Cisco. She is going to talk about project planning, priorities, and budgets. She works at the Old State House Museum and is the Director of Education. Lauren Jarvis is with the Arkansas State Archives, is an archival manager. She is going to talk about preserving, storing documents and artifacts. And Brian McDade is from the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. He's the curator of collections, and he's going to talk a little bit about resource management and energy audits. As I mentioned, one of our goals with the Small Museums program is to promote education and awareness and enjoyment of Arkansas history. And just in, like I said earlier, visiting with several of you, some of the museum collections that we have in the state are really hidden gems. In the Saunders Museum, there's a special collection that has a story that Mr. Claybaker told us last year. We were all just, wow, and I was visiting with Mr. Henry and his group about there's one of the first airplanes, the model airplane that was first patented for a flying machine is in Dermont, Arkansas. So, there are hidden treasures throughout the state, and I bet every single museum in here has something that is so special and so unique. So we're so thrilled that we're able to help you with your projects. And we're also wanting to increase the ability of community-based museums to research, preserve, present, and conserve. Just a sample, Georgianne found some great pictures online, one of the MacArthur Museum, and as you see from the map, and this is just this year, there were, like I said, 19 other awards last year, so we're getting a good representation all across the state. One of the other things I know most of you have already turned in your contracts. Just a few things to keep in mind for this year. This is really important. We're so lucky to have this funding, but I need your help because we have to document how well we are spending this money. So it's great that we can do that, but if we want to continue, we really have to do a great job with our record keeping and promotions and publicity. Please put that this program was made possible in part by a grant from the Division of Arkansas Heritage, funded by your 1/8 cent conservation tax. And that's in your contract, and if you have any questions about that, let me know, but that's really helpful. We want the community to know where this funding is coming from. And your final reports, they're a little earlier this year because we found out when we got to when we started reviewing the grants, your new applications, that we didn't have everyone's reports back. So we moved the deadline a little earlier, and we're really going to work with you to be good stewards of the funding. So we want you to track your expenses and document those, take photos, and have other information that we can use to share. And then also write to your legislators. This is a little thank you note, and we can talk about that more later, but at the end of the project, we'd like for you to have put that into your final report. It's a very competitive process, and I think as more and more museums participate, the process will become more and more competitive. So we want you to use all the best practices from today's workshop in planning and prioritizing, preserving, and using fiscal responsibility.
So I would just like to briefly thank Deborah and Stacy for allowing me to work on this committee. I've done this 2 years in a row now, and it's always so much fun, and I really enjoy going through everyone's grant applications and reading and seeing what people are doing across the state. It's very exciting, and so this is always a lot of fun for me. So I'm grateful to be able to participate in this project. All right, so in terms of plans, when you're working out your grant plan, it's basically as simple as 1, 2, 3. What are you asking for? You want money to pay for utilities, to pay for a program, and we don't necessarily need flowery language. Be simple, be straightforward, but tell us what we need to know. Because if you're not, be concise but complete. That's what we ask for. Because if we don't have all of your information, we will ask for more. Poor Deborah, we came back to her a lot this year and said, Deborah, can you please contact so-and-so and ask them for more information? So more information, like addendums, supplemental information, that is always very helpful when you're putting your application together. In terms of the Humanities Scholar, the grant does require that you have a Humanities Scholar, and depending on what you're asking for, and Brian will go into this a little bit when he talks about the energy audit, but if you are just asking for money to pay for utilities, you may not need a Humanities Scholar. You may need an outside evaluator, an architect, an engineer, or someone like that. But you do need to, if you don't have a Humanities Scholar for your grant because you're asking for utilities, then be sure and explain why you don't list a specific Humanities Scholar. But the grant does ask that you include someone in that capacity, so don't forget to fill that out because we will ask you about it later. And then in terms of budgets, this is really important. And I can't stress this enough. We need to know that you didn't just wake up in the middle of the night and come up with this figure that you were going to plop into your grant application. We want to know how you arrived at all of these numbers and that they weren't just pulling them out of a hat or somebody was speaking to you in another language, you were dreaming about it, whatever. So, budget information, don't hold back with that. And in terms, if you're asking for utilities, money to pay for utilities, then we want to see everything that you've spent on utilities in the last year, whether it's gas, electric, telephone, just it depends on what you're asking for, but give us your 12 months and show us how that money was used. And that is very helpful for us in determining, what we can and can't do in terms of awarding grant money this year. If you're asking for travel money, this is also very important. You need to go to, there are federal and state guidelines that must be followed and that we have to follow. And you were required to follow them because you were doing a grant through the state. And so if you go to the GSA per diem site and click on Arkansas, and that will take you to the Arkansas level, and it will show you what the breakdown is per day in terms of like a hotel rate and also the meals, and then it also gives you the breakdown of how much meal money you can claim based on how many days you are traveling or not traveling. But that's all very important to include. And then mileage, another big thing, the state can only reimburse up to 42 cents a mile, and this is available on the DFNA website on their travel portal. So all of these resources are available to you through state websites, and you can find this information at hand. But as I said, we will come back to Deborah and say, look, we need more information. And I know she had to go back a couple of times this year and ask people for supplemental materials in terms of explaining the budget. And so the more you can provide us on the front end, the better it is for us in terms of evaluating your grant application and determining whether we can or cannot award you funds.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to speak just very briefly about kind of best practices when it comes to storage conditions and then the types of things you're using to store your collections. Some of you may be familiar with some of this already, so just consider this a reminder. If you're not, hopefully this will help you in planning the projects that you're doing and making sure that you're getting items and containers that are going to actually help you meet your goal instead of just causing additional potential problems down the line. This kind of has to vary based by location because this can get really tricky, and based on the number of people that are asking for utility help, you guys are probably already struggling with this a little bit. But I'd just like to remind people that when it comes to best practices for your collections, you want to keep your temperature and humidity levels as stable as possible. So ideally, in a perfect world, your temperature for your collection area would probably be somewhere between 55 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and your relative humidity would be somewhere between 35 and 50%. I know that that's not feasible for a lot of people to hit, so you just want to try and get as close as you can to that. to make sure that you're not creating an unstable environment for the items that you're storing. This really does mediate a lot of any other risks you're going to run into with your collection if you can keep the temperature and humidity levels pretty stable. If you're kind of struggling with that, there are ways you can keep up. You can get, they're called hobo monitors that you can get that will tell you the temperature and humidity levels in the area that you're trying to store all of this in. And then you can, of course, use either humidifiers or dehumidifiers, depending on what your current problem is within the storage unit. So those are just a couple of things to keep in mind as you're planning and trying to figure out where you're going to keep things. I don't have a slide for this, but this ties into this. Keep in mind also about what other kinds of items aside from your collection materials are being stored in the same area. If you have things, if you're kind of short on space and you're keeping a lot of things in the same place, if you have things like paint containers or chemicals or anything like that that's being stored in the same area, those items can actually impact the things that you're storing there. So you really want to keep those as separate as possible, but definitely be aware of what else is in the same area where your storage and collections are. I know sometimes you have to temporarily leave things there, but ideally you don't want to keep a lot of your, say, maintenance or anything like that in the same place. Those things are going to negatively impact the collection that you're keeping. When it comes to trying to house things, whether it is a three-dimensional object that you're trying to store or paper documents, when it comes to purchasing your storage, you want to look for things that are of archival quality. That means really looking for the keywords acid-free and lignin-free, if you can find it, specifically for things for paper documents. You just have to be really careful with that now because acid-free has become kind of a buzzword for a lot of things that are not necessarily of the best archival quality for what you're going to want to keep. So just make sure that you're getting your material from somewhere that you know is going to meet the standards that you're trying to set. And I'll have some links for that here in just a minute. When it comes to the furniture and filing cabinets and things like that you're using to store on, know that that can also impact your collections. So if you're looking at something like getting some file cabinets or something, or shelving secondhand, which is great, there's no problem with that, just make sure that that material has been inspected so that you're not bringing in mold or an insect problem into your collection that you don't already have. You don't want to accidentally bring that in with something else. So you just want to make sure that you have everything as stable as possible. I tend to stay away from wooden shelving in general, so if you have the option of metal shelving over wooden, that's obviously better because you just have, in general, less things that are going to interact with your collections that way. Your storage options are pretty much going to look like this. This is a few options for photograph storage. You can see that they're boxes. You're probably very familiar with this. When it comes to documents, you have the very familiar Hollinger metal edge boxes and acid-free file folders. That's what you want to look for. Anything that's going to just provide an extra layer of protection for your collections, depending on how they're being stored. Depending on how much you need to buy at a time, they can get a little bit pricey, so you may want to double check your prices before you commit to one place. But these are some vendors that we know for sure you can get that material from. Hollinger Metal Edge is great for boxes. We use Gaylord and Demco all the time for various supplies, and that they provide both document storage and artifact storage depending on what you need. So those are great resources for that. University Products and a couple of others as well also serve as places you can get really good quality supplies. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're doing your planning and you're planning your budgets, and that should help alleviate some problems down the line as you're trying to figure out what you need for your budget.
One of the things that we've talked about on the committee this year for moving forward, especially with museums and entities that are requesting funding for paying for utilities, is that we are strongly recommending that you perform an energy audit of your facility. In the effort to promote energy efficiency within our state's museums. This could become a requirement. It's not a requirement this year, and again, but future funding could be tied to whether or not you do an energy audit. And just quickly, I mean, a lot of this is, it's been very upfront in the last few years. I know my personal electric bill, I get something every month from about telling me how to conserve energy. And, you know, it actually does a comparison of like the neighborhood, what other houses in my neighborhood and all that. So, but I know museums are not houses, but some of the same are residential. Museums are not residential structures, but many of the same techniques that you can use to save energy on your home, you can use to save in your museum. One of the slides that I was actually able to put in here is the National Park Service has put forth this preservation brief that will talk about actually how you can have an energy audit and how you can improve energy efficiency with historic buildings and historic structures, because we know many of your small museums are in historic structures. It's an online website, but you can also see there is a download the PDF link. Also, you can turn to some of the local energy companies. This actually is not an energy company, but it's efficiencyarkansas.org. And if you click on the left bubble there, the left cloud, commercial and industrial customers, that will take you to a list of resources. And also energy. I mean, I know energy does not serve the entire state of Arkansas, but they can provide you with guidance, I think. If you go to energy, I've got the link there on the bottom, but if you just go to energy.com and Google energy audit, it'll eventually take you to this page. And then if you click on that red button, finding a participating trade ally, you just put it in your city and it will provide you with resources that you can turn to help you prepare an energy audit. But a lot of projects up front, it's usually recommended that you do an energy audit beforehand. But when you do an energy audit, if you're spending a lot of money on a utility, say it's something electrical, you might be able to locate something that needs to be replaced. And you might be able to find funding for that, get a specialized grant. So we are trying to be energy efficient going forward. And and then something else I would like to mention, that in general, if you at any time need any kind of help, or if you have questions about something in your museum, whether it is an energy audit, whether it is storing archival materials, you can always contact the Department of Arkansas Heritage. You can contact me. Usually we can find time as part of our official job to come out and just kind of be like a consultant. It's free advice. Again, one reason why Deborah says we're experts is many of us, we've had to go through these items. So we've experienced these firsthand. So we do bring a lot of firsthand expertise to the table.